Hey guys, tonight we ease ourselves into a world that looks elegant from the outside. Silk gowns, candlelit halls, carved stone towers. But the moment you step into it, you feel the quiet weight pressing down on your shoulders. You're a medieval noblewoman, born into everything people think they want, yet somehow handed nothing you actually get to choose. You move through cold corridors that echo with other people's plans for your life, hearing your name spoken like a tool, a promise, a bargaining chip. And as you stand there in this drafty hall, the truth settles in. You probably won't survive this without losing a piece of yourself along the way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by standing at the edge of the solar, the one warm room in this entire fortress-shaped icebox, staring at the fire like it's the only thing in your life that listens. Everyone thinks noble birth means luxury, but you already know it feels more like an elaborate cage, one with better drapery. The moment you were born, people weren't cooing about how cute you were. They were calculating alliances, dowries, and whether your existence helped or hurt your family's long-term political schemes. Cute, right? From your first steps, you're watched, measured, and gently nudged into place like one of those carved chess pieces your father keeps polishing. Historians still argue whether noble daughters had more freedom in early childhood than later life. But either way, you feel how quickly the leash tightens. You're taught to be courteous before you even understand what a courtesy is. And by the time you can walk without someone holding your hand, you already have a long list of expectations trailing behind you like a fancy, exhausting train. You take a few steps down the corridor, the cold stones under your slippers reminding you that even comfort is relative. Yes, your clothes are nicer than a peasant's wardrobe, but noble clothing is mostly layers of wool disguised as privilege. They itch, they weigh as much as your late-night anxieties, and they're tailored to make you look composed at all times. There's no such thing as lounging as a noblewoman. The closest thing is pretending not to mind your bodice cutting off half your oxygen supply. One mainstream historical fact hits you here. Noble families often invested heavily in their daughters' presentation, posture, embroidery skill, language training, and the art of looking pleasant even when you're freezing, nauseous, or contemplating running away to become a beekeeper somewhere in the mountains. You're raised not just to be, but to appear. Everything about you is a symbol of your family's status, right down to how you sit, how you stitch, and how quietly you endure discomfort. You know that every move is observed, not because people care, but because people need something to talk about during long winters. The castle is a fishbowl, your childhood is polite surveillance, and with each year you feel the pressure swell. Stand straight, don't laugh too loudly, don't speak unless spoken to, don't run, don't cry, don't show too much joy, too much curiosity, too much anything really. You're a walking display piece, and every emotion has to pass through the filter of, will this embarrass the family? You pause near a window slit, those tiny openings barely wide enough to let light in or arrows out. Through it, you spot the courtyard. There, children of the lower household are running, chasing each other muddy and loud. For a moment, a strange jealousy flickers. They're dirty, shoeless, and cold, but they're free in a small, precious way. A quirky historical tidbit floats through your mind. Some noble families forbade their daughters from laughing outdoors because it was unrefined. Imagine being so wealthy that your laughter has zoning restrictions. You exhale, watching your breath fog in the air. Yes, you live in a castle, but you're also living inside decades of family expectations, each one stacking like stones until you can barely remember which hopes were yours. The elders tell you you're lucky. You have servants to attend you, clothes to warm you, tutors to train you. They never mention how all those things come with strings attached, like some medieval version of a warranty agreement you never signed. As you move toward the Great Hall, footsteps echo behind you. Your governess, of course, making sure you're not sneaking off to do anything scandalous like having a personality. She reminds you of your lessons, your posture, your responsibilities. You smile politely, because even as a child you understand that irritation earns lectures, while compliance earns a moment of peace. People later will wonder why noblewomen seemed so composed, so quiet, so obedient. They won't see the years spent training that stillness into you, the way people mold dough into shapes. They won't hear the unspoken rule: a noblewoman's value improves with her ability to endure silently. You sit in the hall staring at the tapestries, those colourful lies that show heroic battles, mythical beasts and perfectly behaved noble ladies. No tapestry shows your reality. Boredom so deep it feels like a second personality, responsibility heavier than the tapestries themselves, and a future that feels pre-written in someone else's handwriting. A debate lingers in your mind, the kind historians still argue about today, whether noble daughters were truly privileged or merely trapped in a prettier version of the same cage most medieval women lived in. You don't need academics to decide. You live it. And as the wind whistles through the cracks in the stones, you feel the first tremor of understanding. Being born noble didn't save you from misery. It just gave it fancier packaging. You wake the next morning with a pit in your stomach, because today is one of those days when your future is spoken about as casually as the weather. You're barely out of childhood, yet everyone around you seems strangely excited to discuss whom you'll marry, as though you're a particularly valuable goat being evaluated for an exchange. You sit up on your straw-stuffed mattress. Yes, even noble women got poked by straw. And before your feet touch the cold floor, you already know. Whatever happens today, it won't be your choice. Your maid enters with that overly bright morning tone servants use when they're testing the emotional temperature of the room. She helps you dress, because of course the clothing is too complicated for one person to manage alone, and you feel the familiar tug of stays tightening your ribs. It's like medieval Spanx, except no one asked if you wanted it. And as she adjusts your sleeves, she casually mentions the rumour. A suitor is arriving soon. Wonderful. Nothing like hearing about your potential lifelong partner through castle gossip. You walk toward the solar where your mother is already sitting, posture perfect, eyes focused, face arranged in that serene expression noble women master over decades of silent frustration. She motions for you to join her, and the moment you sit, the conversation drops like a stone into the room. Your marriage, your duty, your alliance, not your hopes, definitely not your feelings. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Noble marriages in the Middle Ages were almost always political arrangements. Love was optional, land was not. And romance. Romance was the kind of thing poets wrote about because they weren't responsible for maintaining an estate's income. Your mother begins listing the qualities of the potential match: his lineage, his lands, his alliances, the nearby forests he technically owns, which apparently should excite you for reasons beyond your understanding. Meanwhile, you're thinking, great, trees, truly the foundation of marital bliss. She doesn't ask whether you want this. Medieval noblewomen rarely got that question. Instead, she frames it as inevitability. This is good for the family. This strengthens our position. This is what must be done. It's astonishing how often your personal life is negotiated using the word "are," even when the consequences fall entirely on you. Your father enters moments later, smelling faintly of the horse and political ambition. He nods at you, proud in a way that feels oddly distant, and explains that the suitor's father is eager for the meeting. Translation: two men in two different rooms have decided you'd make a useful bridge between their households. You could be replaced with a well-crafted log, and the negotiations would barely change. Historians still argue whether noblewomen had more influence in these arrangements than records suggest, but either way, you're expected to nod politely and accept whatever future they've drafted for you. Running away is not considered a valid counteroffer, unless you're planning to join a convent, and honestly, some days the idea of a quiet cell and regular mealtimes doesn't sound that bad. Your mother sends you off to practice your embroidery, that time-honoured activity designed to keep you busy, quiet, and symbolically virtuous. You sit by the window, needle in hand, stitching decorative flowers that have more freedom than you do. A quirky fact pops up here. Noblewomen sometimes embroidered coded messages into gifts, tiny rebellions hidden in thread. Today, though, you stick to safe, approved motifs. No one wants your future father-in-law to see a passive-aggressive daisy. You hear the distant clatter of hooves in the courtyard. He's here, the suitor, the man who might, in a matter of hours, become your future. You take a slow breath, trying to steady your expression into something between polite interest and total emotional neutrality. The governess checks your hair, your father checks your posture, Your mother checks your sleeves, as though any wrinkle might derail diplomatic relations. Finally, you're ushered into the hall, and the room feels suddenly enormous. Sunlight filters in through narrow windows, catching dust motes that float like tiny judgmental spirits. The suitor stands beside his father, older than you imagined, stiff posture, a hint of arrogance that suggests he's been told he's important at least 300 times this week. Fantastic. He bows, you curtsy. Words are exchanged, formal, polite, completely devoid of anything resembling genuine human interaction. You're both performing roles written centuries before either of you existed. He compliments your embroidery, because that's what men are supposed to say, and you smile because that's what you're supposed to do. The whole exchange feels like two puppets politely nodding at each other. You're encouraged to take a short walk with him in the courtyard, supervised, of course, because heaven forbid two teenagers accidentally form an unsupervised opinion. As you walk, you try to ask normal questions. His favourite pastime, whether he enjoys music, whether he has any interest in anything beyond land management. His answers are safe, bland, almost rehearsed. You get the sense he's terrified of saying anything that could ruin the alliance. You can relate. At some point, a rooster crows loudly, interrupting him mid-sentence. You almost laugh, but you swallow it, because your mother would be mortified by public amusement. Still, you think, at least the rooster is honest, loud, dramatic, free. When the walk ends, your parents take over the conversation, and you step back, watching your life be discussed like a shipment of grain. You're praised for your manners, your skills, your calmness. The parts of you that matter most to the negotiation are not your dreams, humour, curiosity, or thoughts, but your dowry, your future fertility, and your ability to host dinners without insulting the wrong baron. Later, when the visitors leave, your parents sit you down again. They ask how you felt, but it's clearly not a real question. They want the correct answer, not the true one, so you nod, you smile. You provide just enough positivity to keep the peace. And as night settles in and the candles burn low, you lie awake in your narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing something quietly devastating. Your destiny is being planned by people who will never live it. You step into the castle courtyard the next morning, wrapped in a cloak that feels far too thin for the wind slicing through it. The sky's the colour of watered-down porridge, a perfect match for your mood, and the stone walls around you loom like cold giants. Everyone thinks castles are glamorous, but you're starting to notice that very few people who say that have ever tried living in one. You pull the cloak tighter, but the drafty chill creeps in anyway, as persistent as the castle gossip. A pair of servants hurry past carrying buckets of water, sloshing ice-cold droplets onto the icy ground. One of them glances at you briefly, respectfully, but not impressed. That's the thing about castle staff. They see everything, and therefore almost nothing surprises them, including the sight of a noblewoman shivering in her own courtyard. You trudge toward the great hall, your footsteps echoing in that cavernous, endlessly chilly space. You've noticed that even when the fireplaces are roaring, the warmth rarely reaches your fingers or toes. There's a mainstream historical fact for you. Medieval castles were not cosy. They were defensive structures, stone fortresses designed to repel invaders, not house comfort. Thick walls and narrow windows made it nearly impossible for heat to linger, so during winter, most noble families simply accepted that indoors meant slightly less freezing. You glance up at the ceiling beams, dark wood stretching overhead like giant ribs, and take in the long hall tables still cluttered with remnants of last night's supper, trenchers hardened into miniature shields, spilled ale forming sticky trails, and a single roasted onion rolling sadly near the salt cellar. Everything in a castle feels bigger, messier, louder, and yet somehow lonelier than the outside world. Someone once told you that castle life was exciting. You wonder now if they confused exciting with full of drafts, loud echoes, and absolutely no privacy whatsoever. Because privacy, that doesn't exist here. Servants move constantly through the rooms, ladies-in-waiting hover like polite shadows, guards linger in corridors, and someone is always listening. Always. If a noblewoman sneezes on one side of the fortress, someone on the other side is probably already discussing what it means. Historians still argue whether noblewomen enjoyed more solitude than records indicate, but as you look around at the bustling hall, you have your doubts. You're surrounded, yet strangely alone, watched, but rarely heard. You walk toward your seat at the long table, passing the tapestry of St. Margaret slaying a dragon. The embroidery is beautiful, but the story hits a little too close to home. She defeats a monstrous beast, escapes its belly and emerges triumphant. Meanwhile, you're trying to survive another morning inside a stone refrigerator while pretending you're completely fine. A culinary servant brings you breakfast, a thick slice of yesterday's bread, a wedge of cheese, and something that might be porridge or might be a political statement. You poke it gently, trying to decide whether it's more edible or symbolic. Medieval noble breakfasts weren't known for luxury. Another quirky historical tidbit. The idea of a lavish morning meal didn't catch on until much later. Right now, you're grateful for anything warm, even if it has the texture of damp sand. While you eat, the steward approaches with his scroll of household concerns. He begins listing them rapidly. Grain shortages, a leaking roof over the pantry, a dispute between two servants, and a shipment of wine delayed due to a muddy road. You nod along, mentally translating, "Welcome to castle life, where every day is a combination of cold stone, mild chaos, and the ongoing fear that your plumbing system might be a bucket someone forgot to empty." After breakfast, you decide to escape just for a moment to the upper walkway. You climb the narrow spiral staircase, the kind designed to trip enemies and noblewomen equally, and emerge onto the wall walk. The wind hits you immediately. Of course it does. The walkway has no real shelter because the builders assumed anyone up here would be wearing armor, not silk-lined sleeves. You press your hands onto the cold stones. From up here, the surrounding fields look peaceful, but your life inside the castle feels anything but. It's funny how people imagine nobility means constant leisure. In reality, you spend more time managing discomfort than basking in luxury. There's always something too cold, too loud, too dirty, too fragile, too heavy, or too damp. Or all of the above simultaneously. And then there's the noise, the clang of iron from the smithy, the shouts of stable hands wrestling with a stubborn horse, the squealing of pigs being herded, the constant muttering of servants carrying baskets, the echoing boom of kitchen pots, a baby crying somewhere in the lower quarters, the rhythmic thudding of guards marching. Living in a castle is like living inside a giant stone drum that someone keeps hitting with livestock. There's a moment, a small, fleeting one, when you think about the world beyond the castle walls, the villages, the forests, the river. But even that thought curls inward, reminding you that freedom outside the castle comes with dangers and expectations inside it. You're safe here, yes, but only in the way that someone is safe inside a museum display case. As you turn away from the parapet, your cloak whipping against your legs, you see the castle exactly for what it is. Not a symbol of privilege, but a beautifully decorated pressure cooker. You live in a place built to withstand sieges, and sometimes it feels like you are the one being slowly besieged, by duty, by scrutiny, by unending responsibility, by the cold that seeps into your bones and never truly leaves. And the funny part, people still envy you, if only they knew that the stone walls that protect you also trap you, that the grand hall that impresses visitors only magnifies your loneliness, and that the fortress everyone admires is really just a maze of chores, expectations, and uncomfortable furniture. You make your way back down the stairs, feeling the familiar weight of the castle settle around you once more. Your life may look noble from the outside, but from within these walls, it's just another kind of miserable. You barely make it halfway across the Great Hall before someone calls your name, because of course they do. You had maybe 12 quiet steps of peace, and now it's time for one of the most exhausting realities of noblewoman life, running the household, not helping, not overseeing a few details, running it. Every corner of the estate, every supply, every servant, every minor disaster somehow flows straight toward you like you're the only drain in a medieval sink. The steward clears his throat, a sound that means brace yourself. He lists today's issues in quick succession. The bakery overused flour, the dairymaids misplaced a whole batch of cheese, the kitchen boys broke a ladle that absolutely should not have been breakable, the laundress insists someone stole her soap, and the gardener claims the rabbits have achieved military-level tactical intelligence. You just stand there, absorbing it all, because being a noblewoman isn't lounging on cushions. It's project management with colder rooms. There's a mainstream historical fact here. Noblewomen often acted as estate managers, handling everything from food production to wages to medicinal stores. In many households, the lord was away for months, even years, leaving the lady in charge of keeping the entire operation functioning. Basically, you're a CEO in a gown that inhibits basic mobility. You follow the steward through the corridors, stepping carefully around servants carrying baskets of root vegetables that look as tired as you feel. The first stop is the pantry, where you discover the leak wasn't a leak at all, just some very determined mold trying to colonize every shelf. The maid in charge wrings her hands, apologizing profusely. You want to reassure her, but you also want to scream into a tapestry. Instead, you gently instruct her on how to deal with it, because that's what a noblewoman does. Remain calm while quietly dying inside. Next stop, the kitchen. It's chaos, as usual. Smoke curls upward from the hearth, pots boil over, and one apprentice cook appears to be chasing a chicken that is absolutely not supposed to be here. You raise one eyebrow, your specialty eyebrow, the one that says "fix this before I spontaneously combust." The head cook bows, muttering explanations about schedules and shortages. You remind him, softly, because shouting isn't your style, that guests may arrive within weeks, and the household must reflect order, not poultry-based anarchy. Historians still argue whether noblewomen enjoyed authority in these spaces or merely absorbed blame when things went wrong. Judging by the cook's nervous expression, you suspect it's a generous mix of both. As you leave the kitchen, a servant rushes up with a message. The dairymaids want you to examine a dispute. Wonderful. You walk out to the courtyard where two women stand beside a row of milk pails, each insisting the other watered the morning's supply. You listen to their bickering, half scandal, half soap opera, and decide on a fair solution. Both will work together on the next batch under supervision. They nod, still glaring at each other. Another fire extinguished. One quirky historical tidbit pops into your mind. Some noblewomen kept detailed household books, pages of entries tracking expenses, supplies, remedies, livestock behaviour, even notes on servant drama. If you kept a book like that, today's entry would be 30 pages long, half of which would simply say, "Why?" You find yourself heading toward the herbarium next, because of course the household healer wants your approval to pick more rosemary for a medicinal brew. You step into the garden, inhaling the sharp green scent. For a moment, just a moment, you feel peace. Then you remember you still have to check the accounts ledger, review the linen inventory, and settle a complaint from a visiting merchant who claims your stable boys gave his horse a bad haircut. You sigh. Running a medieval household isn't glamorous. It's endless, repetitive, bone-deep tiring. And yet, everyone outside believes your life is one grand dinner after another. You wish they could see you right now, mud on your hem, hair frizzing in 13 directions, mentally calculating whether the last shipment of rye will last the month. By midday, you finally sit in the solar with the ledger open before you. Numbers stare back like little judgmental soldiers. Expenses, repairs, wages, food stores. It's all here. You trail a finger down the parchment, double-checking the steward's estimates. You catch two mistakes, fix them, and realize you're starting to understand why so many noblewomen in portraits look both serene and visibly done with everything. You're interrupted again, this time by your mother, wanting your input on seating arrangements for next month's feast. That's another thing no one warns you about. You have to think constantly about who sits where, because a misplaced baron can turn a pleasant meal into a passive-aggressive battlefield. After rearranging the seating chart, you finally convince your mother to let you have a moment alone. She nods, albeit reluctantly. You think she worries that if you sit still too long, you'll start forming ideas, ambitious ideas, rebellious ideas, dangerous ideas. You walk back through the corridors, taking in the tapestry scenes, the flicker of torches, the clatter of distant chores. Everything here requires your attention, your approval, your energy. You maintain order in a place built to breed chaos. You're praised for it, but never truly thanked. As you pass the Great Hall again, a thought settles over you like the castle chill. Your life may be cushioned by privilege, but it's also buried under responsibility. And no one sees how exhausting that is. Not really. You inhale slowly, preparing for the rest of the day, knowing full well that at least a dozen more problems will find their way to you before sunset. They always do. Welcome to noble womanhood. The job you didn't apply for, can't resign from, and must perform flawlessly while wearing 20 pounds of fabric. You barely have time to savour a sip of watered wine before you're summoned, again, to the Great Hall. This time, it's not a pantry crisis or a bread scandal. It's something much worse. court politics. The kind of soft, simmering drama that looks elegant to outsiders, but feels like walking barefoot through a field of invisible thorns. You descend the stairs with your usual composed expression, the one you've spent years perfecting. Inside, though, you're already bracing yourself. Because court politics isn't loud. It isn't obvious. It's a quiet, insidious thing. Whispers instead of shouts, glances instead of gestures, smiles that feel sharp enough to slice bread. When you enter the hall, a few visiting nobles are already gathered. They stand in small, perfectly arranged clusters, performing the ritual of pretending to enjoy each other's company while secretly judging absolutely everything. You know the drill. They pause their murmured conversations the moment you approach, their faces shifting into masks of polite interest. A mainstream historical fact flashes through your mind. Noble courts, whether large royal courts or smaller regional ones, were hotbeds of power competition. Every interaction, every handshake, every compliment was spun into social currency. People talk about medieval warfare, but honestly, you think the real battleground is here, in rooms lined with tapestries and smiling assassins. You greet the visitors with a serene smile, the kind that signals warmth without revealing anything. One lady steps forward, dressed in a gown so elaborate it could serve as a portable tent. She compliments your hair, too quickly, too sweetly. You recognize the tone immediately. She's fishing, either for weakness or for gossip or for anything that might give her leverage. You thank her, offering a gentle nod, aware that the safer response is bland and polite. She leans closer. "I hear a match is being discussed for you," she says in a voice soft enough to sound friendly, but loud enough to reach anyone pretending not to listen. Ah, there it is. The first blade of the day. You keep your expression neutral. "Discussions always happen," you reply, which is technically true and completely useless. Historians still argue whether noble women willingly played into this system or were trapped by it. Standing here under a dozen watchful eyes, you know the truth. Even if you're aware of the game, you don't get to choose whether to play. Another noblewoman glides over, her smile sweeter than honeyed wine. She asks about your embroidery, your mother's health, the progress of the harvest. 3 safe topics in a row, which means she's circling you like a shark trying to decide where to bite. When she finally asks if you've heard any interesting news lately, you know exactly what she wants. Information to use elsewhere. Preferably in a way that benefits her. You give her nothing, of course. You've learned that the safest answer is always the vaguest one. "Nothing beyond the usual rhythms of the household," you say smoothly. Meanwhile, you watch her eyes flicker with irritation before she quickly masks it. 1 point for you. A servant walks by, bumping a bench slightly, and you catch him muttering under his breath. Probably something like, "Nobles and their nonsense." Honestly, you agree. If you weren't obligated to stand here looking elegant, you'd gladly join the servants in the kitchen for some straightforward, honest chaos. The visiting nobles drift like schools of fish around the hall, talking about alliances, trade routes, marriages, and the weather, though somehow even the weather is political. You overhear one baron complain about excessive rain destroying his crops, only to be countered by another who insists the rain helps purify the land. You wonder if arguing about clouds is a requirement for holding a title. Then comes the moment you dread. Your mother subtly nudges you toward a cluster of men deep in discussion. They fall silent the moment you join them, their eyes assessing, not in a predatory way, but in a calculating one. You're not a person here. You're a possibility, a future tie, a new branch on someone else's family tree. One of the men addresses you, asking whether you enjoy music. You do, but you have no idea what answer is politically advantageous today. You choose a middle path. It brings peace after long days, harmless, safe, boring, exactly what you need to be in this moment. A quirky historical tidbit pops into your mind. Medieval etiquette guides warned women never to appear too clever in mixed company. Too clever meant threatening. Too curious meant improper. Too outspoken meant dangerous. So you keep your intelligence tucked behind a curtain, like a tapestry nobody is allowed to touch. The conversation circles around you, polite and suffocating. Compliments, questions, subtle probes. Every smile costs energy. Every response is a tiny negotiation. You feel like you're trying to maintain a perfect balancing act on a beam made of porcelain. One wrong move and you'll be the next rumour whispered in corridors. Eventually, one noble mentions the suitor from yesterday, watching your reaction closely. You offer the standard, approved response. The meeting was pleasant, which is about as revealing as saying water is wet, but it satisfies them. The talk shifts to estate matters, hunting trips, and the upcoming feast. You stand, listen, nod, and endure, because that's what noble women do. You're not allowed to slip away, slump your shoulders, or ask why grown men insist on arguing about who has the fastest falcon. After nearly an hour, you finally extract yourself under the guise of checking on the household. They smile, pretending to wish you well, but you know they're disappointed. You're leaving the stage too early. As you walk back down the corridor, the tension slowly drains from your shoulders. The castle may be cold, drafty, and filled with chores, but at least chores don't judge you. The moment you're finally alone, you exhale deeply. Everyone thinks noble women glide through beauty and privilege. They don't see this part, the silent warfare disguised as conversation, the constant guarding of your words, the pressure to be appealing but not threatening. If castles are physical fortresses, courts are emotional minefields, and you're expected to walk them gracefully every day without ever showing how miserable it makes you. You escape the great hall with your sanity mostly intact, but the moment you turn the corner toward your chamber, your maid intercepts you with an armful of fabric that looks suspiciously heavy. You already know what this means, the wardrobe consultation. Because nothing says, relaxing afternoon, like being wrapped in 15 layers of fabric chosen specifically to make you look wealthy, immovable, and slightly uncomfortable. She spreads the garments across your bed, velvets, brocades, heavy wools dyed in colours that would make a peacock feel underdressed. You sigh softly because medieval noble fashion isn't just clothing, it's strategy, it's armour. It's a form of silent diplomacy you're forced to participate in whether you want to or not. You run your fingers along the embroidered sleeves. They're beautiful, yes, but they're also a reminder of how little freedom you have. You can't choose what you wear based on comfort or mood. Every gown broadcasts your family's wealth, alliances, status, and, let's be honest, expectations of femininity that have never once been updated. A mainstream historical fact rolls through your mind. Noble women's clothing in the Middle Ages could weigh anywhere from 10 to 30 pounds, depending on the layers, the season, and the amount of decorative metalwork. You're basically dressing in wearable furniture. No wonder portraits always show noble women sitting. Standing too long in this stuff is an endurance sport. Your maid holds up two options. One is a deep green gown with gold trim, your mother's favourite because it signals good health. The second is a crimson overdress so elaborate it could stop traffic in 3 separate kingdoms. Your mother likes that one even more because it suggests power without being too bold. Heaven forbid you appear too bold, someone might think you have opinions. As your maid helps you into the first layer, you feel that familiar squeeze around your ribcage as the laces tighten. You take small, controlled breaths. Medieval fashion is not designed for oxygen, or sitting comfortably, or bending at the waist, or existing with a full set of internal organs. You glance at your reflection in the polished metal plate hanging near the window. You look elegant, composed, wealthy, and absolutely nothing like someone who can easily move her arms above shoulder height. Being a noblewoman means learning to gesture with your hands while your sleeves perform their own minor parade. Your sleeves drag slightly on the floor. That's intentional. Long sleeves mean status. They also mean you risk dipping them in soup at every meal, but apparently that's a small price to pay for social superiority. Your maid adjusts your hair next, weaving ribbons and pins in patterns that would confuse a mathematician. You sit very still, because if you move even a little, one of these pins is going to stab you directly in the skull. You've accepted that this is part of the aesthetic. Historians still argue whether noblemen enjoyed these elaborate fashions or merely endured them. You suspect the answer is both. Clothing like this gives you presence. It's true. But it also takes away so much. Mobility, comfort, and any chance of sneaking into the kitchen for a late-night pastry without sounding like an approaching tapestry. Your mother enters, eyes sharp, inspecting every inch of your outfit. You stand still as she circles you like a falcon sizing up prey. The gold trim sits perfectly, she announces, as though she has achieved something monumental. But perhaps we should add the belt with the clasp. You try not to groan. The belt. The one with the iron buckle shaped like a lion. the lion that weighs approximately as much as a small infant. But you nod, because your mother's word here is law. A quirky historical tidbit flickers in your memory. Some noblewomen's belts weren't just decorative, they were literal status markers with tiny pouches, miniature relics, charms, and even keys to storerooms dangling from them like medieval ASMR triggers. You have a belt like that too, and it jingles when you walk, making stealth impossible. It's less fashion accessory and more mobile inventory management system. Once dressed, your mother gives a satisfied nod and leads you toward the corridor. The gown swishes behind you in a long, luxurious trail. It looks elegant, but each step is a calculated maneuver, catching on the edges of stone, occasionally trying to stage a mutiny against gravity. You must look your best for the visitors, your mother reminds you. You want to say you look like you survived a fabric avalanche. But you simply nod. Visitors always expect noblewomen to appear polished, pristine, practically glowing. No wrinkles, no stains, no hair out of place. Meanwhile, the men get to roll into hall meetings in mud-stained boots, and everyone still bows to them like they invented agriculture. When you reach the solar, a few guests are already waiting. Their eyes flick to your gown first. Because of course they do. Clothing speaks louder than words here. You offer a polite curtsy, trying not to topple forward under the weight of your sleeves. One of the ladies compliments your gown, but there's a sharpness beneath her tone, like she's measuring whether your dress subtly outshines hers. Court fashion is competitive, but it must be disguised as kindness. A young nobleman bows and says something about how regal you look. You smile, pretending not to notice how his gaze lingers on the expensive embroidery instead of your actual face. You chat, you smile, you glide through the room with practiced elegance, even though your shoes pinch and your bodice feels like it's attempting to reshape your ribcage. Every movement is restrained, refined, rehearsed. You're wearing beauty, but you're also wearing boundaries. Clothing in this world isn't just style. It's armor, cage, currency, and costume all at once. As you sit, carefully, you feel the weight of it settle into your lap. This is what noble womanhood feels like. Always dressed to impress, never dressed to breathe. You lean back slightly, letting the fire's warmth seep through your sleeves, and think, in another life, maybe you'd wear something simple, something loose, something that doesn't require its own storage chest. But not here, not now, not as a medieval noblewoman. Your fashion defines you, and also quietly exhausts you. You'd think, after surviving layers of fabric that could double as castle insulation, the rest of your afternoon might be mercifully uneventful. But no, because now it's time for something far trickier than dressing like a jeweled statue, eating like one. You make your way toward the great hall again, the swish of your sleeves sweeping behind you like two dramatic judgmental banners. The meal is already being prepared, and even from the corridor you can hear the bustle, the clatter of serving platters, the rush of servants carrying steaming dishes, and the muffled arguments about whether the pottage is too thick or appropriately robust. There is no correct answer. Someone will be offended either way. As you enter the hall, a few early guests glance up. You can feel their eyes travel from your hair to your gown to your shoes. Not a single detail escapes inspection. You offer them a serene smile, but internally you're giving a small prayer that your sleeves don't catch fire from a nearby candle. Again. The tables are arranged, the benches cleared, and the air smells faintly of roast meat, garlic, and the ever-present scent of damp stone. You take your place at the high table, a privilege, yes, but one that also means every movement you make is publicly visible. You can't even scratch your nose without someone analysing it. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. Medieval dining etiquette for nobles was strict. Very strict. There were rules for how to break bread, how to dip it, how long to chew, which hand to use, when to speak, when not to speak, how far to lean over, and even how to sit. One wrong move, and congratulations, you're now the topic of someone's afternoon gossip. The meal begins with hand washing. A servant pours scented water over your hands into a basin. It's relaxing, until you remember half the hall is staring at you and that you must dab them dry with perfect delicacy. You resist the urge to wipe them on your dress like a normal human being. Finally, the first course arrives, trenchers filled with pottage. A thick, vaguely vegetable-like mush that is somehow edible and suspicious at the same time. Everyone receives a portion, and the hall fills with the sound of quiet, dignified slurping. You take a small spoonful, tasting the earthy flavour and trying not to wince. Then, because fate enjoys comedy, the person beside you begins talking. He asks whether you favour music, hunting, or embroidery. You respond politely, aware that the correct amount of enthusiasm is pleasant but not passionate. Passionate interest signals opinion. Opinion signals personality. Personality signals risk. A quirky historical tidbit pops into your mind. Noblewomen were discouraged from showing too much excitement at meals because it suggested a lack of refinement. Imagine having to pretend you're only mildly enthusiastic about food when the kitchen has somehow managed not to burn the bread for once. The second course arrives. Roasted fowl. You pray silently for small, manageable pieces. You're not granted this mercy. The roast goose is placed before you, an enormous bird that looks like it lived a very full life, and the servants begin slicing it. You receive a generous portion. Too generous. You eye it, trying to figure out the least humiliating way to tear into it. Of course, there are rules for this too. You must avoid anything that involves gnawing, excessive gripping, or ripping off meat like a starving wolf. Always break with your fingers delicately, using bread as a tool. Do not lick your fingers. Do not wipe them on your gown. Do not drop anything. And absolutely do not, under any circumstances, let grease drip onto the tablecloth. That is social death. You attempt to bite. It is unsurprisingly greasy. You swallow carefully, eyes on the table, hoping the candlelight hides your inner struggle. The man beside you resumes speaking, this time about falconry. You nod patiently, even though you have exactly zero interest in the mating habits of hunting birds. You murmur appropriate responses, never interrupting, never contradicting. Inside, you are offering a small prayer to any medieval saint who specifically protects women trapped in boring conversations. Then comes the moment you dread, the shared salt cellar. There is only one at each table. Everyone must reach it. Take a bit with extreme delicacy and avoid appearing greedy. You lean forward just enough, pinch a respectable amount, and place it on your trencher. Perfectly executed. You silently congratulate yourself, even though you're sure someone nearby will still find fault in your form. Historians still argue whether noblewomen actually enjoyed these meals or simply endured them. Judging by the tension in your shoulders, you're leaning heavily toward endured. Dessert finally arrives, a sweetened custard that looks heavenly. You dare to feel one tiny spark of excitement. Then a servant informs you softly but firmly that your mother prefers you eat only half to maintain a delicate silhouette. You look longingly at the custard. You consider rebellion. You consider licking the bowl. Ultimately, you settle for 3 small bites and a lifetime of regret. When the meal ends, everyone rises in a perfectly choreographed wave of politeness. You stand, smoothing your gown, making sure your sleeves haven't dipped into anything that might stain. The hall buzzes with chatter. Who said what? Who sat where? Who seemed too eager? Who seemed distracted? You know some of that chatter is about you. It always is. You walk away from the table, feeling the weight of silence behind your back. The kind of silence filled with judgments, interpretations, and exaggerated retellings. You maintain your composure, gliding toward the corridor, but inside, you're more tired than before you arrived. Because meals aren't nourishment. Not for noblewomen. Meals are performances, and you're always centre stage. Just once you think it would be nice to eat something with your hands standing barefoot in the kitchen, unobserved, unjudged, unadorned. But not today. Today you return to your chamber, hungry for privacy, not food. You slip away from the great hall with your shoulders tight, half convinced that if you stay another minute someone will ask you to judge the appropriate firmness of a turnip. But instead of heading back to your chamber, your maid gently reminds you that the chaplain has requested your presence in the chapel. Of course he has. Because nothing says restful digestion like a lecture on moral purity delivered by a man who has never once worn a bodice. You make your way down the dim corridor toward the small family chapel, a cold stone room decorated with flickering candles and saints who all look mildly disappointed in you. The air smells of incense and damp stone. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders, trying not to focus on how the cold settles into your bones like an overly committed houseguest. Stepping inside, you find the chaplain already waiting, framed by a tapestry of the Virgin Mary that has more warmth and softness than the entire room combined. He gives you a nod, the kind that suggests both piety and perpetual judgment. You offer a polite curtsy, wishing for a moment that you could just sit quietly and stare at the candle flames without having to perform spiritual excellence. A mainstream historical fact hovers in your mind. Religion permeated every aspect of medieval life. Noblewomen, especially, were expected to embody piety, modesty, charity, and an almost saint-like composure, even when dealing with mouldy pantries, political gossip, and goose grease that refuses to wash off your hands. Faith was both comfort and control, a guiding light and a leash. The chaplain begins speaking about humility, obedience, and the responsibilities placed on women of noble birth. You've heard it all before, at least 100 times. You could recite the sermon yourself at this point, complete with dramatic pauses, but you nod, hands clasped, pretending to absorb each word like newly revealed wisdom. He warns against vanity. You resist the urge to glance at your sleeve embroidery. He cautions against pride. You recall the roast goose incident. He speaks about purity. You mentally review your day and conclude that, yes, you've behaved like a flawless medieval porcelain doll. Then he shifts to marriage, always a favourite topic for chaplains. He reminds you that a noblewoman's duty is to honour her husband, support him, guide the household in virtue, and uphold the family reputation. The subtext is so loud you could hear it from the battlements. Prepare to sacrifice your personal desires in the name of piety and alliances. You inhale slowly, letting the candlelight blur slightly in your vision. Faith should be comforting, and sometimes it is. Sometimes, on nights when the castle is quiet and your chores are done, you light a single candle and whisper prayers that actually feel like your own. Prayers for peace, for understanding, for strength, for something resembling happiness. But public faith? That's another story. Historians still argue whether noblewomen internalized these religious expectations or simply performed them to survive. Standing here, with the chaplain's voice echoing off stone, you feel the truth deep in your bones. It's both. You believe in some of it. You endure the rest. The chaplain finishes with a stern reminder about confession. A lady must cleanse her soul often, he says, staring at you with an intensity that suggests he suspects you of secret mischief. If only he knew the wildest thing you've done this week was eat 3 extra bites of custard. After the sermon, he gestures for you to pray. You kneel on the cold stone that seeps through your gown and right into your knees, and press your palms together. You whisper the expected words. You close your eyes. And for a moment you let your mind drift away from the pressures of noble life. The flickering candlelight behind your eyelids becomes a kind of sanctuary, a soft glow carved out of the chaos. You imagine yourself outside the castle walls standing in a quiet meadow at dawn. No obligations, no eyes watching, no politics twisting your every action into meaning, just sunlight and silence. But the moment cracks when your foot begins to fall asleep. You shift discreetly, trying not to look like someone waging war with her own limbs. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. Some churches installed softer kneelers, but your little chapel, no such luxury. Holiness apparently is measured in joint pain. When you rise again, the chaplain hands you a small psalter to encourage your devotion. You accept it with a smile, even though you already have 3 similar books on your bedside table. You secretly hope he doesn't quiz you on the Psalms later. Leaving the chapel, you step back into the corridor, walking slowly as your knees attempt to remember how joints work. The air feels a little less heavy out here, a little more yours, but your reprieve lasts only seconds. Your mother appears from around the corner, her expression sharp with purpose. "You must be more mindful of appearances," she whispers. "Lady Aldith claims she saw you hesitate before praying." You blink. You hesitated because a candle sputtered and almost went out, but sure, let's turn it into a theological crisis. Your mother continues lecturing softly as she walks beside you. You nod at the right moments, already accustomed to the rhythm. To her, piety is performance as much as belief. A noblewoman must be devout, yes, but more importantly, she must be seen as devout. The castle staff watches, the visiting nobles watch, the chaplain watches, and heaven forbid your future husband catches you yawning during mass. Back in your chamber, you finally peel off some of your heavier layers, feeling the weight lift like a second skin. Your maid sets the psalter gently on the table, then helps you loosen the bodice enough to breathe. You settle onto your wooden stool near the window, watching the late afternoon light scrape across the courtyard stones. Below, you see children playing, crows hopping around for scraps, and a pair of servants hauling firewood. It's an ordinary scene, but one that feels strangely grounding. Faith is woven into all of this, into the meals, the chores, the conversations, the choices you never got to make. And sometimes, you wish it could be less about rules and more about tenderness, less about scrutiny and more about solace. As the bells ring for evening prayers, you rest your forehead against the cold glass and whisper your own quiet words. Ones no chaplain needs to approve. Words for resilience, for softness, for peace. Because surviving noblewomanhood requires faith, but mostly it requires endurance. You wake before dawn the next morning, not because you want to, but because something in the castle always wakes you. A banging shutter, a coughing servant, a rooster whose life you have contemplated ending at least twice this week. But today, it isn't any of those things. Today, it's the quiet, creeping awareness of what's expected of you. Motherhood. That looming presence, that unspoken destiny that follows noblewomen like a polite but relentless shadow. You sit up slowly, pulling your shawl tight around your shoulders as the chill sinks into your skin. A pale line of early light slips under your door. You stare at it for a moment, letting your breath settle. Even thinking about motherhood makes your stomach twist, because here, it isn't a milestone, it's an obligation, a requirement, a duty written into your very existence long before you could speak. Your maid enters quietly, carrying warm water. She greets you softly, sensing your mood. She's seen this before, the way your expression shifts on days when the future feels heavier than the present. She doesn't comment, but she lingers a little longer than usual, as though offering silent support. As she helps you dress, you remember the hushed conversation between your parents last night. Something about preparations, about making sure you're ready when the time comes. They said it as though readiness was simply another chore, as though your body were a vessel they could prepare like a feast or a piece of furniture. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Medieval noblewomen were expected to produce heirs, preferably male, and as many as possible. Marriage wasn't viewed as companionship, it was a contract, a continuation of lineage. Your personal feelings were irrelevant next to the importance of ensuring a legitimate heir who could inherit land, titles, alliances, and problems. You exhale slowly. Your maid pulls your hair into gentle braids, weaving ribbons through them. You catch your reflection in the polished metal mirror. You look young, too young, and yet old enough, according to everyone who matters. Stepping into the corridor, you walk toward the solar where your mother waits. She sits by the fire, her embroidery poised in her lap, her eyes lift to yours, soft and assessing. "Sit," she says quietly. You do. She looks at you for a long moment. There's something complicated in her expression. Pride, expectation, worry, and a hint of something else. Something almost like regret. But she masks it quickly. "It is time you prepare yourself," she begins, threading her needle through fine linen, "for the next stage of your life, for your duty." There's no need to ask which duty she means. You nod, keeping your face composed. Your mother explains the expectations, how you must maintain your health, how you must behave with modest affection toward your future husband, how you must pray for strength, how you must accept that childbirth is unpredictable. The word hangs in the air, unpredictable, a soft synonym for dangerous. You've heard servants whisper stories. You've seen midwives walking through the courtyard with satchels filled with herbs and tools that look more like instruments of war. You've heard the chapel bells ring for women who didn't survive labour. You've listened to older noblewomen speak quietly about the pains, the risks, the nights that seem endless. Historians still argue whether noblewomen faced greater or lesser childbirth risks than peasants. On one hand, nobles had better access to food and rest. On the other hand, wealthier women often gave birth at older ages and under more pressure, sometimes with attendants who relied more on superstition than hygiene. Either way, the danger was real, and you feel it settle on your chest like an anvil. Your mother continues speaking, but her voice drifts into a soft blur as you stare into the fire. The flames flicker like small, frantic lives. You imagine your own, fragile, shaped by duty, caged by expectations. Your mind wanders to a quirky historical tidbit. Some noble families kept special birthing charms made of bone or ivory, believed to protect mothers and infants. Midwives would place them under pillows, tie them to bedposts, or even sew them into clothing. A blend of faith and fear woven into every labour. You wonder if your mother has one tucked away for you. You swallow subtly, your throat suddenly dry. Your mother reaches out and takes your hand, something she rarely does. Her fingers squeeze yours gently. For a moment her facade cracks. You see the woman beneath, the one who endured, who survived, who carries her own unspoken stories. It is frightening, she admits quietly, but you will be strong, as I was, as my mother was. She releases your hand and the moment passes, the armour sliding back into place. Later you walk through the castle garden needing air. The winter sun is pale and weak, offering barely any warmth. You wander between the leafless shrubs, your breath visible in the cold. A few chickens peck at the soil, completely oblivious to how blissfully simple their lives are. You stop near a stone bench and sit carefully, your skirts billowing around you like a fabric moat. You study the frost edging the herbs, life clinging to life, somehow surviving. You imagine what your future might look like. You see a large bed surrounded by midwives, the smell of herbs, hot water, fear, sweat, the chaplain murmuring prayers, the worry in everyone's eyes, not for you, but for the child you're expected to deliver safely, perfectly, without complaint. You inhale sharply. A single tear threatens, but you blink it away. Noble women do not cry in gardens, at least not where anyone can see. A soft rustling startles you. One of the elderly nannies who helps in the nursery appears, a basket of linens in her arms. She pauses, noticing your expression. Then, with the gentleness of someone who has seen entire generations grow and falter, she offers you a small smile. It's all right to be afraid, she whispers. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when fear sits beside you. You nod, quietly grateful for her presence. She continues on, leaving you with the echo of her words stitched into your thoughts. You sit for a while longer, letting the cold air steady you. Eventually you rise, smoothing your skirts, and make your way back toward the castle. Motherhood isn't a choice for you. It's a requirement carved into your future. But it's also something deeper, something terrifying and monumental and strangely sacred. You know you will face it, because every noblewoman does. But for now you walk slowly, letting yourself savour these last quiet moments, before duty arrives and changes everything. You return from the garden with a mind full of worries you're not allowed to voice, and by the time you re-enter the castle, one of the nannies is already waiting. She gives you a polite bow, the practiced kind that acknowledges your rank, but also carries a subtle message. We need you in the nursery. Of course you're needed. In a noble household, children are simultaneously surrounded by dozens of caretakers and somehow always in need of their mother's presence at the exact moment you're finally trying to breathe. You follow her up the winding stairs, your skirts brushing the cold stones as you climb. The higher floors grow warmer slightly, thanks to the cluster of bodies, blankets, and small fires that heat the nursery rooms. When you step inside, the air is thick with the scent of milk, herbs, wool, and a faint undertone of something that can only be described as child chaos. 3 nursemaids bustle around, adjusting blankets, stirring warm milk, chasing a toddler who has decided today is run away from authority day. You watch him dart between benches with surprising speed, giggling like he's discovered the meaning of freedom itself. You envy him for exactly 1 second. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind. Noble children were often raised primarily by wet nurses, nannies, and tutors. Their mothers, women like you, were expected to oversee everything yet remain just removed enough to maintain dignity and composure. You're meant to be present, but not too present. Affectionate, but not overly so. Involved, but still somewhat ceremonial. It's a delicate balance. Loving your children without allowing anyone to think you're neglecting your higher duties. And yet, if you appear too distant, the whispers begin. There is no winning this game. You move to the cradle where your youngest sibling, or perhaps one day, your own child, rests. The baby stirs at your presence, tiny fingers curling instinctively. You reach down and trace the soft curve of their cheek. For a moment you feel a warm pulse of tenderness, simple and instinctive. Then a nursemaid approaches with a quick bow. "My lady, the child has been restless," she says. "We fear too much cold in the night." You nod, adjusting the blanket. But inside another truth simmers. It is not just the cold that unsettles children here. It is the constant shuffling of hands that hold them, the ever-changing rotation of caretakers, the structure of noble life that places intimacy behind ceremony. One quirky historical tidbit surfaces in your thoughts. Some noble households had so many attendants that a child could grow through an entire year without seeing the same caretaker twice in a week. A dizzying carousel of faces, hands, voices. No wonder some noble children grew up with emotional detachment that later scholars interpreted as natural refinement. You look at the baby again and feel a pang. You don't want your future children to grow up distant from you. But you also know the truth. Your life isn't designed to let you be the kind of mother you might wish to be. The head nanny leads you to the playroom where two older children, a little girl practicing her letters and a boy constructing a fort out of wooden blocks, sit under the supervision of a stern tutor. The tutor gives you a bow so stiff he might snap. "My lady," he says, "the children are progressing well." You step inside, observing the scene. The little girl brightens when she sees you, her eyes sparkling. "Will you read with me?" she asks. You wish you could say yes without thinking. But your mind immediately runs through the unspoken rules. Noble women aren't supposed to spend too much time doing childish tasks. Reading is acceptable, educational, cultured, proper. But playing, crawling on the floor, laughing loudly with children, someone would absolutely whisper about it. Probably Lady Aldith. She whispers about everything. So you kneel beside the girl carefully, your skirts pooling around you like a small fabric kingdom, and read her a few lines from a psalter. She beams with pride as she sounds out the Latin syllables. You encourage her softly, heart tugging just slightly every time she smiles. The tutor watches closely, likely cataloguing your every word. Noble women must be nurturing, but only in the appropriate, dignified way. Too much enthusiasm, and you risk being labelled sentimental. Too little, and you risk being labelled cold. It's a miracle anyone manages to parent at all. The little boy nearby accidentally topples his wooden fort, and the clatter echoes across the room. He freezes, eyes wide, waiting for scolding. The tutor starts to open his mouth, but you beat him to it. "It only means you can build an even stronger one," you say gently. His face brightens. Your heart tugs again. You spend a few more minutes with them until your mother's voice echoes faintly from the corridor. "Where is she?" "Of course." You rise, smoothing your gown, and prepare to re-enter the adult world of politics, duties, and expectations. The nursemaids swoop in behind you, resuming their quiet control over the room like a well-trained flock. As you step out, something heavy settles in your chest. Children are raised here, but rarely with the kind of closeness you crave. You love them, deeply, but from a distance the world has chosen for you. Historians still argue whether noble women were good mothers or simply figureheads in a complex childcare system. You think, how could they be anything else when the structure itself keeps pushing you away from the very children you're supposed to shape? You pause at the top of the stairs, hand on the cold stone wall. One day, when you have children of your own, you hope, quietly, desperately, that you can carve out even a small pocket of closeness in a world determined to separate mother from child. But for now, you walk downward, back toward duty, feeling the echo of tiny hands slipping away from yours. By the time you leave the nursery and descend the stairs, your body already feels heavier than your gown. It isn't just fatigue, it's that familiar ache behind your ribs, the dull throb in your back, and the strange fluttering weakness in your hands that sometimes appears without warning. You pause halfway down the steps, pressing a palm lightly to the wall, breathing slowly until the moment passes. This is your normal. Or rather, this is what medieval noblewomen called normal, an endlessly shifting blend of exhaustion, discomfort, and symptoms no one has the vocabulary to properly describe. You continue downward, your footsteps soft on the stone, reminding yourself that you don't have the luxury of resting. Not today, not any day. You enter the solar where the tapestries hang slightly crooked, and the fire sputters as though also struggling to stay alive. Your lady's maid immediately notices your pale expression and brings you a small vial of herbal tonic, a bitter mixture that smells like someone boiled a meadow and strained it through disappointment. She encourages you to drink it anyway, insisting it will balance your humours. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Medieval medicine relied heavily on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Every ailment, from headaches to heartbreak, was blamed on an imbalance. Feeling dizzy? Too much phlegm. Feeling weak? Too little blood. Feeling tired? Probably demons, but politely described as excess melancholy. You drink the tonic because it's expected of you, even though it tastes like slightly warmed pond water. Your maid watches with sympathetic eyes. She's seen you faint before, once during mass, once during a long dinner, once because someone cinched your corset too enthusiastically. You'd think after all these years people would realise noblewomen need air, not tighter fashion choices. Sinking carefully onto a cushioned bench, you lean back and try to ease the pressure in your chest. The winter air has been harsh lately, and draughts sneak into the castle like mischievous spirits, chilling your bones no matter how many layers you wear. Your hands tremble slightly as you pull the shawl around your shoulders. Your mother appears moments later, gliding in with perfect posture. "You look pale," she says, in the tone of someone commenting on a slightly wilted flower arrangement. "Perhaps more tonic." You suppress the urge to suggest that what you truly need is a nap, a hot bath, and the ability to make your own life choices. Instead, you nod and assure her you'll be fine. She sighs, sitting beside you. "Your marriage will require strength. You must take care not to appear fragile." You bite back a smile. Appearances again. Everything in this world is about appearances. Your health may falter, but so long as you stand straight and smile, you are considered perfectly functional. The herbalist arrives shortly after, summoned by your mother. She carries a satchel of remedies: dried sage, valerian root, lavender bundles, and a collection of items that look suspiciously like twigs from the forest floor. She examines you with the seriousness of a scholar reading ancient texts. "You're too cold," she declares. "Correct. The castle is a refrigerator. Your complexion lacks warmth." "Yes, because you haven't seen sunlight since last summer. Your humours need balancing." "Of course, they always do." She prescribes more tonics, warm baths, less raw fruit, and, for some reason, quiet reflection near an open flame. You nod through the recommendations, even though the last time she suggested reflection near fire, your sleeve nearly ignited. The herbalist leaves. Your mother follows. Finally, you have a few moments alone. You sit in the quiet, rubbing your temples gently. Your body has been sending signals for months. Dizziness, fatigue, occasional sharp pains in your side, strange cravings for salted meat at odd hours. You know something is off, but no one around you possesses the medical knowledge to identify it. Historians still debate the causes of these mysterious ailments in noblewomen. Iron deficiency, vitamin shortages, stress, corsetry, untreated infections, or simply the toll of living in a perpetually cold stone fortress. Your maid returns with a cup of warm broth. She sets it before you with a kind smile. "Drink slowly," she whispers. She's the only person who ever speaks to you like you're human, not a symbol, not a duty, not a future alliance. As you sip, a quirky historical tidbit pops into your mind. Some noblewomen believed gemstone powders mixed into drinks could cure illness. Lapis lazuli for strength, amber for clarity, pearls for purity. You tried pearl powder once, it tasted like disappointment and chalk. You lean your head back, letting your eyes drift shut. The room hums around you, the crackle of the fire, the distant chatter of servants, the soft rustle of tapestries in the draught. Your pain eases slightly, softened by the warmth. But peace never lasts here. Footsteps approach, and one of your young cousins bursts into the room, cheeks red from running. "Come see! A merchant has arrived with new fabrics." Of course, more fabric. Exactly what you need. You rise slowly, forcing your body to cooperate. Every step reminds you how fragile a noblewoman's health can be, how sickness isn't always dramatic fevers and fainting spells. Sometimes it's just 1,000 little discomforts gnawing at you day after day. As you walk toward the hall, you think about the expectations tied to your health. You must be strong enough to manage a household, delicate enough to appear refined, fertile enough to produce heirs, modest enough not to complain, and composed enough to pretend this constant ache is simply part of being alive. You exhale, pressing a hand. briefly to your side as another small pain darts through you. Being a medieval noblewoman means living with health issues you're not allowed to acknowledge, treatments that barely help, and pressure that definitely doesn't. And yet, you endure. Because you must. You straighten your back, lift your chin, and glide forward. Another performance begins. The merchant's arrival brings a flurry of motion to the castle, but instead of feeling excited, as everyone expects, you feel a growing dread. Because his presence means one thing: travel preparations. And travel for a medieval noblewoman isn't adventure, it's exhaustion dressed up as duty. You walk into the great hall, trying not to wince as the cold stone floor presses through your thin shoes. The merchant is already unrolling bolts of fabric across a long table. Rich wools, shimmering velvets, imported silks that look far too delicate for actual human wear. Your mother inspects each piece as though the fate of the kingdom depends on picking the correct shade of burgundy. When she sees you, she beckons you closer. "We leave for Lord Edric's estate in 2 days," she says, voice calm but eyes sharp. "A winter visit, yes, but necessary." Of course it's necessary. Everything is necessary when noble families need to reinforce alliances, negotiate disputes, or gently remind one another who holds the upper hand. You nod, even though travel in winter is basically asking for misery wrapped in frostbite. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Medieval roads were notoriously unpredictable. Mud, ruts, rocks, thieves, wolves, and weather so dramatic it bordered on theatrical. Travelling even 20 miles could take an entire day, and that's if the wind didn't decide to become a personal enemy. Your mother selects a fabric for a new overdress, one meant to impress Lord Edric's household, which means heavy, embroidered, cold-resistant, and impossible to pack without its own dedicated servant. As preparations begin, you slip away to your chamber to gather your own belongings, though belongings is a generous term. Most of what you own is functional rather than personal. Shawls, cloaks, boots, gloves, a psalter, a needle case, scented oils, and the small carved comb your mother gave you when you turned 12, the closest thing to a keepsake a noblewoman is allowed. Your maid helps you fold everything neatly into a wooden chest. The lid barely closes because winter clothing somehow expands like bread dough. Once finished, she moves to your bedside table and begins wrapping small items in cloth. "Will you bring a warming stone, my lady?" she asks gently. "Yes," you murmur, "and an extra one for my feet." She gives a sympathetic nod. She knows how quickly your limbs turn to ice on cold journeys. A knock sounds at your door. Your cousin again, breathless. "The steward says we must check the carriage." Of course you must. Nothing says, relaxing afternoon, like evaluating whether a wooden box with wheels is currently safe enough to rattle your spine into powder. You make your way to the courtyard where the steward waits beside the carriage, and when you see it, you momentarily consider faking an illness, anything to avoid climbing into that rolling torture device. The carriage is sturdy, built of thick timber with iron hinges and wheels designed to survive medieval terrain. But inside, barely padded benches and a single fur blanket that smells faintly of horse. Cozy, the steward bows. "We've reinforced the axles, my lady, and the wheels have been greased." You nod, wishing he would also reinforce your patience. He helps you climb inside so you can test the comfort. You sit down carefully, immediately feeling the hard wood beneath the thin padding. A jolt from outside sends the carriage rocking slightly, and your stomach drops. Oh yes, this is going to be a delight. Historians still argue whether noblemen travelled in more comfort than commoners. Certainly you have a carriage instead of your own 2 feet. But comfort. Comfort is not involved. Comfort is at home, sitting by a fire. Comfort is not bouncing along frozen roads while attempting not to vomit. You step back out quickly, giving the steward a polite smile. "It will suffice," you say. This, in noblewoman language, translates to, "I hate it, but I'm trapped, so please let me pretend it's fine." The next morning arrives with a bitter wind slicing across the courtyard. The skies are sullen grey, the kind that promises absolutely nothing good. Servants load luggage onto the carriage, struggling against the cold. Your mother directs them like a seasoned general. Your father oversees the horses. You stand quietly, clutching your cloak, already beginning to shiver. Your maid hands you a small packet. "For nausea," she whispers. Inside is a bundle of herbs tied with twine, You tuck it into your sleeve gratefully. Finally, it's time. You climb into the carriage with your mother beside you and 2 cousins opposite. The moment the door shuts, you feel as though you've been sealed inside a very decorative coffin. The horses start moving, and immediately the carriage lurches violently, sending you bouncing an inch off your seat. Your mother barely blinks. She's used to this. You, however, grip the sideboard desperately. Outside, the world jolts by in uneven motion. Mud splashes against the wheels. The horses snort. The carriage jerks again, rattling your teeth. Within minutes, you feel motion sick. Within half an hour, your back aches. Within an hour, you understand why noblewomen try so hard not to travel unless absolutely necessary. A quirky historical tidbit flickers across your mind. Some noblewomen carried perfumed cloths to press to their faces during travel, not for luxury, but to mask the smell of other travellers, horses, and occasionally themselves. You don't have a perfumed cloth, but you do have a sleeve which will have to suffice. The journey stretches endlessly. You shift positions repeatedly, but nothing helps. The cold creeps in through cracks in the wood. Your toes go numb, your fingers stiffen, and through it all the roads grow rougher, sending the carriage jostling with increasing violence. You try to distract yourself by looking out the window, but the barren winter landscape offers little comfort, just skeletal trees, frozen fields, and crows that somehow look healthier than you feel. Historians debate whether noblewomen welcome travel for the change of scenery. You, however, know the truth. There is no scenery beautiful enough to justify spinal injury. By late afternoon, the carriage finally slows. The horses snort one last time as though tired of you personally. You step out onto unfamiliar ground, nearly stumbling as your legs remember what stable earth feels like. You inhale deeply. Travel may be necessary. It may even be strategic. But enjoyable? Not even remotely. You straighten your gown, lift your chin, and prepare to greet your host with grace, even though your entire skeleton is currently questioning its existence. The moment your boots touch the frozen ground outside Lord Edric's estate, you're greeted by the unmistakable sound of trumpets, sharp, brassy, and entirely too enthusiastic for someone who just spent hours in a mobile punishment box, masquerading as a carriage. You straighten your spine, ignoring the way your joints crackle like old parchment. A cluster of servants rushes forward, each trying to look more helpful than the next, and within seconds you're swept into the carefully orchestrated chaos of a winter festival in full swing. Of course, you knew the visit would include formalities, but you did not expect festivities. Festivities mean performances, and performances mean exhaustion. Lord Edric himself greets your family in the courtyard, his cloak billowing dramatically in the wind. "We're honoured by your presence," he says, smiling broadly. "You've arrived just in time. The celebrations begin tonight." You give a polite nod, even as a quiet scream forms in your mind. The servants lead you to your chamber to rest. Rest, being a gentle, optimistic word for sit on a hard bench while 3 women fuss over your hair, sleeves and posture. Your gown is adjusted, your ribbons rewoven, and your expression carefully smoothed into something that communicates graceful noblewoman, not person who might throw up if asked to dance too vigorously. A mainstream historical fact taps at the back of your thoughts. Festivals were critical to noble relationships. They showcased wealth, reinforced alliances, and offered chances for families to display their grooming, taste, and political savvy. They were, in short, social battlegrounds disguised as parties. When the sun dips, the great hall is illuminated with dozens of candles, each flame flickering against the tapestries and making the whole room feel alive, warm, bright, overwhelming. You enter with your family and the hall erupts in respectful murmurs. Music spills from the corner where minstrels play lutes and harps with alarming enthusiasm. The first hour is tolerable. You stand gracefully, exchange polite greetings, and sip watered wine that tastes like disappointment with a hint of sour berry. But then the real challenge begins. Mingling. Lady Aldith, because of course she's here, glides toward you with her trademark smile that could slice through stone. "My dear," she says sweetly, "you look a bit pale. Travel must have been taxing." You want to respond with, "Yes, my joints nearly evacuated my body," but instead you smile. The journey was manageable. That's noble speak for "I will not be discussing the ways in which the carriage tried to end me." She laughs lightly. "And tonight will revive your spirits. We've prepared dances. You feel your smile freeze. Dancing. Another strenuous activity disguised as merriment. The musicians begin a lively tune, and young nobles drift toward the centre of the hall. You're expected to join them. Your mother gives you a subtle nudge. Your partner, some cousin of Lord Edric's, steps forward with a courteous bow. He's polite, well-dressed, and unfortunately enthusiastic. You take his hand, and the dance begins. Immediately you regret every life decision that led you here. Your sleeves snag someone's cloak. Your shoe slips slightly on the polished floor. Your ribcage pinches against your bodice as you attempt a graceful turn. Your partner twirls you faster than physics or dignity should allow. Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen enjoyed dancing. Standing here, trying not to collapse, you feel confident saying, enjoyment is entirely dependent on oxygen availability, which in your case is at an all-time low. By the end of the dance, you're breathless in the bad way, not the romantic way. You exchange forced smiles with the crowd, then retreat toward the edges of the hall like a wounded bird seeking shelter. You manage to make it 3 steps before someone else intercepts you. This time, it's a baroness with a voice like a lute string pulled too tight. She compliments your gown, your earrings, your poise, and your delicate composure. You thank her, because that's what you do. But inside you're wondering why delicate is treated like a compliment, when it mostly means we assume you're about to faint. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. Some nobles actually fainted on purpose during festivals to gain sympathy, admiration, or strategic attention. You briefly consider attempting the tactic, but decide you prefer not to become tonight's entertainment. The night stretches on. You sit, stand, dance, sit again, and smile so much your cheeks feel numb. Music swells, people laugh. Servants weave between the guests with trays of mulled wine and honey cakes. You accept one, nibbling carefully, aware that someone is definitely watching to see whether you eat too much or too little. At one point, a troubadour performs a ballad about a brave knight rescuing a damsel. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. If damsels were truly as helpless as songs claim, your entire household would have collapsed centuries ago. Your back aches, your feet throb, your head rings with the echo of a lute strings, and yet you cannot leave, not until your parents deem it appropriate. You offer polite conversations, exchange shallow compliments, and maneuver through the hall as though floating, because that's what noblewomen are expected to do: float, glide, endure. A visiting noblewoman eventually sits beside you. She sighs softly, leaning closer. "These festivals are lovely," she murmurs, "but they do go on." You turn to her, surprised by the honest tone. She gives you a knowing look, the kind shared by women who have survived too many evenings like this. It's the closest thing to camaraderie you've felt all night. The music softens. People begin drifting away toward their chambers. You exhale in relief so profound it may qualify as spiritual. Finally, you're escorted back to your room. The moment the door closes, you slump into a chair, unlacing your sleeves and kicking off your shoes with all the dignity of a person removing shackles. Festivals look glamorous from the outside: silks, candles, music, laughter. But from the inside, they are marathons in disguise, performances wrapped in merriment, exhaustion painted with gold. You sink into bed, muscles aching, eyes heavy, mind buzzing. Noble celebrations are not joy. They're work that everyone expects you to smile through. And as you drift into an uneasy sleep, you realize even their good times are miserable. You wake the next morning with the distinct sensation that someone replaced your spine with a bundle of damp reeds. Every muscle aches from the dancing, socializing, smiling, and pretending your life is a tapestry of effortless grace. You stretch your fingers, wincing as you sit up. The festival noises have died away, replaced by the quieter murmurs of servants clearing last night's chaos, scraping wax from tables, collecting fallen ribbons, debating who spilled what and where. For a blissful moment you think the day might pass quietly. It does not, because while festivals end, scandals never sleep. You haven't even finished adjusting your shawl when your mother rushes into your chamber, her face composed but her eyes sharp enough to slice through silk and dignity alike. She shuts the door behind her with a soft thud, signalling that whatever she's about to say is serious. "There's talk," she begins. "Of course there's talk. There's always talk. Noble courts thrive on rumours the way plants thrive on water. You brace yourself. About what? Her lips thin. About you. Excellent. The day has truly begun. She steps closer, lowering her voice. Lady Aldith claims she overheard Lord Edric's nephew compliment your dancing. And then, her voice tightens, that you blushed. You stare at her. I blushed because he spun me so fast I nearly fell. That is not what she's telling people. And there it is. The nightmare of every noblewoman. Not war, not plague, not childbirth. Whispers. Because whispers can burn reputations to ash without ever raising their voices. A mainstream historical fact sinks in. Medieval noble society was obsessed with reputation. A noblewoman's worth rested not just on alliances or beauty, but on chastity, modesty, and perceived purity. Even small gestures, innocent interactions, or accidental blushes could be twisted into entire stories of impropriety. You take a slow breath. What exactly is she saying? Your mother closes her eyes briefly. That he favoured you, that you encouraged it, that you lingered near him after the dance. You try not to laugh at the absurdity. You lingered because your shoes were trying to murder your feet. But logic and rumours have never been. Close friends. Your mother begins pacing. This could complicate future arrangements. People may interpret your behaviour as forward, or worse, desperate. You blink. For standing. She stops pacing and gives you a look that could flatten a battalion. In their stories, it will be far more dramatic than that. Historians still argue whether medieval noblewomen weaponized rumours intentionally, or merely circulated them out of boredom. Standing here, watching your mother warily scan the room as though gossip might leap out from behind the curtains, you suspect both theories are correct. She sits beside you and straightens your sleeve unnecessarily. It's her way of calming herself, though it feels more like she's preparing you for battle. You must be composed today, she says. Laugh less, speak less, avoid appearing radiant. Radiant, as in, don't accidentally look alive. You nod. Composure is the only armour you're allowed. After she leaves, your maid enters with a worried expression. My lady, she whispers. The servants are talking too. Servant gossip spreads faster than influenza, sometimes faster. You descend into the hall with careful steps, prepared for the onslaught, and there it is. The shifting glances, the polite smiles that don't reach the eyes, the subtle tilts of heads as people whisper behind raised hands. It's like walking into a room full of detectives who have decided you are their primary source of entertainment. You force your expression into a serene, untouchable smile. It doesn't help. Lady Aldith approaches almost instantly. She looks delighted, which is always a bad sign. My dear, she purrs, I heard you had such an enjoyable evening last night. You respond with a gentle voice that says absolutely nothing. I enjoyed the music, she tilts her head. And the company? You offer her a smile that is friendly on the surface but lined with quiet menace, a skill noblewomen cultivate early. All company, you say, was perfectly appropriate. Her smile tightens. A point to you, but the damage is done. Rumours are like ink spilled on fabric, impossible to fully scrub out. You catch snatches of conversation as you move through the hall. Blushed, they say. Very forward. Perhaps she's aiming for a different match. Must keep an eye on her. You want to shout. You want to say, I'm just tired and dizzy and trying to survive my own sleeves. But noble women don't shout. They endure. You head to the courtyard for air, but even there, rumours follow like persistent geese. Two younger ladies pause mid-conversation when they see you. A knight nods politely but avoids meeting your eyes, which is bizarre, given that eye contact yesterday was definitely allowed. You retreat toward the stables, the only place where people are too busy to gossip. The stable master gives you a bow before returning to a stubborn horse. The air smells like hay and honesty. You linger, enjoying the illusion of normalcy. A quirky historical tidbit pops into your mind. In some regions, noblewomen kept falcons not just for hunting, but as socially acceptable companionship animals that conveniently gave them excuses to wander away from gossip-filled halls. You wish you had a falcon right now, preferably one trained to attack rumours at their source. But your moment of peace ends when your mother finds you. She leads you back toward the hall, whispering instructions. Speak gently. Act serene. Let the rumours die by offering no fuel. Rumours never truly die. but you appreciate her optimism. For the rest of the day, you move through conversations like a ghost, careful, muted, unthreatening. Each step feels heavy, each word measured. By evening, the whispers soften, not because they've stopped, but because someone else has become more interesting. A broken goblet, a misplaced jewel, a merchant who overcharged someone's cousin's wife. Your scandal dissolves into the background noise, but you know the truth. Even innocence can be weaponized here. Even a blush can become a battle, and your life, your reputation, can be reshaped by a single whisper carried through a cold, echoing hall. You wake the next morning hoping, praying, that today will finally be uneventful. But the castle has other plans, because just after breakfast, as you try to slip quietly toward the solar for a moment of peace, your mother intercepts you with a knowing look. Lady Edgifu is waiting in the garden, she says. She wishes to speak with you, which is code for, prepare yourself for emotional gymnastics. You make your way outside, the winter air sharp enough to bruise your lungs. Lady Edgifu stands by the fountain, hands clasped, expression warm, but in the way a fire is warm, beautiful, inviting, and capable of destroying you if you get too close. She greets you with genuine delight, or at least the most convincing imitation you've seen. My dear, she says, come walk with me. You know this tone. It's the tone noblewomen use when they're about to discuss something personal, delicate, and potentially explosive. You fall into step beside her, the gravel crunching softly under your feet. I heard some nonsense spoken of you yesterday, she begins, voice tight with indignation. Quite unfair. Your stomach sinks. Rumours. Again. You offer a composed smile. People talk. Oh, they do, she agrees. And for the record, I do not believe a word of it, which means she definitely heard all of it. You thank her anyway. As you walk, she lowers her voice. It must be tiring being so watched. You almost trip over a stone. No one talks about this, not openly. This is forbidden topic territory. You study her expression carefully. She looks sincere, but sincerity can be a mask as well. You've seen women lie with more warmth than most men show in their vows. Historians still argue whether noblewomen had true friendships or merely alliances disguised as companionship. Moments like this make you understand why the debate continues. Every interaction, even the tender ones, feels like some combination of comfort and caution. She continues, you must be very careful whom you confide in. Your thoughts sharpen instantly. This is advice, or a warning, or both. You answer quietly. I know. She stops walking and turns to face you fully. You seem kind-hearted. That is a dangerous trait here. You blink, startled. Dangerous. Kindness. She nods, reading your confusion. Kind women assume others are as well. Her gaze flicks toward the castle. They aren't. For a moment, something inside you eases because she's right. Because she gets it. Because you feel for a heartbeat seen. Then she smiles gently. But you have a good head on your shoulders. Use it wisely. And just like that, the vulnerability evaporates, the message delivered, the warning planted. You part ways with a polite curtsy. But as you walk toward the castle, your mind churns. Is she a friend, a mentor, a manipulator, a concerned ally, a subtle spy, all of the above? In noble life, categories overlap until everything is a blur. Inside, you find your cousin waiting in the solar. She greets you cheerfully, asking how you slept, how you like the estate, whether you've enjoyed the festivities. Her smile is bright, genuine, a balm after Lady Edgifu's layered caution. You sit beside her, and for a few minutes, you allow yourself to relax. She laughs easily, talks quickly, and tells you about a troubadour who accidentally insulted Lord Edric's hunting dog. You laugh, loudly, which is dangerous but worth it. Then she says, almost too casually, so, what did Lady Edgifu want? Your smile stiffens, and there it is again, the tightrope. Every woman you speak to might be friend or foe, genuinely warm or quietly ambitious, and you must navigate it without burning bridges, revealing fears, or accidentally providing ammunition for anyone's next round of gossip. You answer with practiced neutrality. Just conversation. Your cousin's expression reveals nothing. No suspicion, no relief. Just polite interest, which somehow feels more terrifying. You excuse yourself gently and head toward the library alcove, a tiny, drafty room filled with scrolls and dust. It's one of the few places where you can think without being watched, or at least being watched less. You curl into the small wooden chair, tugging your shawl close. You breathe deeply, letting silence settle around you. Friendships here are delicate threads, easily tangled, easily snapped. Everyone smiles, everyone curtsies, everyone whispers. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. In some courts, noblewomen kept coded journals about their alliances, small marks indicating trust, caution, or danger. A triangle meant loyalty, a circle meant uncertain, a slash meant untrustworthy. You suddenly understand why. You think back on Lady Edgifu's warning, on your cousin's curiosity, on every smile that felt too sharp, every kindness that felt too heavy. Friendship is a performance, trust is a gamble, and you, caught in the middle, are expected to navigate it flawlessly. You lean your head back against the wooden paneling, closing your eyes. You imagine what true friendship might feel like. Soft, steady, simple, unsupervised, unperformed. But here, every bond holds weight, every conversation holds risk, every shared laugh might echo later in someone else's twisted retelling. Historians still argue whether noblewomen lived isolated emotional lives. You think the answer depends on one small question. Who can you trust? Your mind drifts through faces, some warm, some cold, some unknowable. And you wonder, quietly, painfully, what would it be like to have one friend you didn't have to perform for? But that kind of friendship is rare, precious, dangerous. You rise slowly, smoothing your gown. Time to smile again. Time to step back into the delicate dance of alliances and secrets. Being a noblewoman means mastering many skills, but none are as exhausting as navigating friendships built on shifting ground. You leave the alcove with your thoughts tangled like embroidery threads, hoping the worst of the day's social acrobatics is behind you. But the moment you step into the corridor, you hear the soft shuffle of footsteps, the unmistakable rhythm of servants moving through their daily routines. And as soon as they notice you, their motions shift. They bow, they pause, they step aside, they lower their gazes. It's subtle, polite, and suffocating. Because now you're stepping into another arena of noblewoman misery, being constantly observed and quietly judged by the people who know you best, your servants. You descend the stairs toward the kitchen corridor, wanting water or warmth, or just a moment with people who aren't speaking in riddles. But even here, in the busiest part of the castle, eyes flick your way. Not in hostility, never that. The servants rely on you, respect you, but they also watch, they interpret. They whisper among themselves in ways no noble ever hears directly. You walk past two maids scrubbing the floor. Their conversation stops instantly. One of them curtsies so deeply you worry she'll get stuck. You offer a small smile, trying not to look intimidating. But noblewomen are intimidating by default. It's built into the architecture of the world. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Medieval servants were the eyes and ears of every household. They witnessed everything. Arguments, alliances, mistakes, triumphs. Their opinions could shape reputations. Their retellings could define which noblewomen were respected, overlooked, or quietly mocked. You continue toward the warm heart of the castle, the kitchens, hoping for a brief moment of human normalcy. The cook is barking orders. Pots clang. The smell of stew wraps around you like a comforting blanket. For a moment, no one notices you. Then someone spots your gown. Everything stops. Half a dozen servants bow and step back, forming a path as though you're royalty itself. You hate it. You didn't ask to be an obstacle course, but this is the etiquette. You nod and keep moving, pretending the attention doesn't make your skin crawl. The cook greets you with a wide smile, not the polished noble smile, a real one. "My lady," he says, "you look tired. Shall I send broth to your room?" You want to say yes, and perhaps a small pastry for my emotional stability. But noblewomen aren't supposed to ask for snacks. Asking implies desire. Desire implies appetite. Appetite implies imperfection. So you answer politely, "That would be welcome." As you turn to leave, you overhear two kitchen boys whispering. She seemed sad. No, tired. No, maybe angry. Did you see her eyebrows? Your eyebrows. Wonderful. Imagine living a life where your eyebrows could spark analysis. Historians still argue whether medieval servants had more insight into noblewomen than fellow nobles did. Watching these boys debate your emotional state based on eyebrow position, you suspect the answer is yes. They see you without the polished layers, without the performance, but that doesn't mean they understand you. Leaving the kitchen, you head toward the weaving room where the ladies-in-waiting gather. Their roles are technically below you. Yet, in many ways, they are your constant companions, the people closest to your daily life. When you enter, they rise immediately. You insist they sit. They sit with rigid posture, hands folded neatly. Their eyes follow every step you take, taking mental notes on your expression, your tone, your gown, your jewellery. Not because they're malicious, simply because their lives depend on anticipating your needs and moods. One of them, Elfrida, approaches with a bow. She's young, earnest, and trying desperately to impress. "My lady," she says, "I've repaired the tear in your blue gown." You thank her warmly, and for a moment her whole face lights up, but then you catch the subtle glance between the other ladies. Not mocking, not cruel, just assessing. What did they see? Your kindness? Her eagerness? Your exhaustion? You'll never know. You sit with them, attempting to join the weaving. But your presence makes them too formal, too careful. Every thread they pull seems guided by invisible fear. You try cracking a small joke about your perpetual war with sleeves. One lady laughs politely, too politely. Another smiles but immediately checks if anyone saw her. You sigh internally. Friendship here isn't possible. Affection is risky. Familiarity is complicated. You are their mistress, their employer, their symbol, their responsibility, and their topic. You finish one uneven row of weaving, uneven enough that one lady discreetly offers to straighten it later and excuse yourself. In the corridor, 2 footmen bow as you pass. You try to smile in return, but one flinches slightly, mistaking your politeness for scrutiny. That tiny reaction, the flinch, makes your stomach twist. You're not cruel. You're not demanding. You try so hard to be gentle, and yet your presence alone creates tension. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces. Some noblewomen wore bells on their gowns, not for beauty, but so servants could hear them coming and adjust their behaviour before being seen. In a way, it was courteous. In another way, it reinforced the distance, an audible warning that the mistress approaches. You walk through the castle, absorbing each glance, each bow, each muttered comment, quickly silenced as you pass. You're never alone, not truly. Even when you're not being watched, you're being observed. Even when you're not spoken to, you're being interpreted. Even when you're not judged aloud, you're being analysed. Historians may debate the nature of power in noble households, but in this moment, you understand something seldom said plainly. Servants don't just serve noblewomen, they define them. You return to your chamber, closing the door behind you. The silence is instant, thick and unfamiliar. You breathe deeply, finally free of eyes, ears, whispers, interpretations. And for the first time today, you feel like yourself. Not a symbol, not a mistress, not a story being retold in kitchens and corridors, just a woman. A tired, lonely, watched woman in a drafty castle. And as you sit beside the fire, you realise that sometimes the coldest parts of noble life aren't the stone walls, it's the distance between you and everyone else. You wake the next morning to the sound of raised voices echoing up from the courtyard, sharp, clipped, masculine voices. Arguments about land, always land. You sit up slowly, the chill seeping into your bones before your feet even touch the floor. Your maid enters with warm water and a worried expression. "Your mother asks for you in the solar," she says softly. "It concerns the northern fields." Of course it does. The northern fields, those endless acres of disputed soil, have haunted your family's sleep for months. Too many borders, too many claims, too many men convinced the land belongs to them simply because they said so loudly enough. You follow your maid to the solar, each step quiet but heavy. Inside, your father, mother, and the steward stand around a table covered in parchment maps weighted down with candle holders. They look up as you enter, each face carved with tension. "We need your judgment," your father says without preamble. You know the tenants better than either of us. You blink. It's true. You've spent years managing the household and its people. You know which tenants are honest, which are struggling, which pay late because of hardship rather than spite. But knowing people and controlling land are two very different things. Your father gestures you closer. The steward explains. A neighbouring baron is disputing the boundary again. He claims several strips of farmland belong to his estate. Your tenants disagree. Both sides are threatening formal complaints. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Noblewomen often oversaw land management when their husbands or male relatives were absent, or even when they were present but distracted. They were responsible for allocating resources, settling disputes, negotiating harvest expectations, and making judgment calls that affected livelihoods. Yet those same women were rarely recognised for their authority. When decisions succeeded, men took credit. When they failed, women absorbed the blame. Your father points to the map. You visited those fields last summer. Tell us what you saw. You step closer, studying the hand-drawn boundary lines, the ink smudges, the faded annotations from years past. You remember the fields, golden under the sun, dotted with wildflowers, bordered by an old stream bed. You remember the tenants' careful tending, their pride, their fear of losing what little they have. The tenants have worked that soil for generations, you say quietly. Their families can trace it back further than the barons claim. Your father exhales, relieved. Good, we'll stand firm. But your mother raises a hand. Standing firm invites escalation. If the baron feels slighted, he may retaliate. Retaliate, meaning he may cut off trade, block shipments, encourage border skirmishes, or send messengers carrying veiled threats disguised as polite concern. You swallow. You're suddenly reminded how little power a noblewoman truly has, even when she has responsibilities. You can advise, you can recommend, but ultimate decisions belong to the men who may or may not agree with the logic you've offered. Still, they asked for your judgment. That means something, not everything, but something. The steward adds, your opinion carries weight with the tenants, my lady. They will accept a decision more peacefully if it comes from you. There it is, the quiet truth. You're the bridge, the diplomat, the one who must soothe tensions so the estate doesn't erupt into chaos. Historians still argue whether noblewomen found empowerment in these roles or simply carried invisible burdens. Standing here, feeling the pressure settle onto your shoulders, you suspect the latter. Your father dismisses the steward, leaving you alone with your parents. They look at you with expectation, pride, and a dash of worry. Your mother steps closer, touching your arm. You must be firm today. Speak clearly. Do not let the baron's men fluster you. Fluster you, meaning do not look weak, do not stammer, do not hesitate, do not act like the young woman you still are inside. You nod. Later, in the great hall, the baron's representatives arrive. 2 stern men wrapped in thick cloaks carrying scrolls of their own. You sit beside your father, hands folded, hoping your face resembles calm authority rather than mild panic. The men present their claims. They insist the land falls within their lord's historic right. They cite old agreements, vague testimonies, long-dead relatives. You listen silently, every muscle tight. Then your father gestures for you to speak. You inhale slowly. Last summer, I walked those fields. The tenants have maintained those borders since my grandfather's time. Their records are consistent. Your claim refers to a boundary that predates the stream's shift. That shift is documented. You keep your voice soft but steady. You avoid sounding emotional. Men hate that. You avoid sounding confrontational. Men hate that too. You aim for the impossible middle ground, assertive, knowledgeable, polite. The men exchange glances. They were not expecting you to be informed. You continue, we will not relinquish land worked by our tenants for generations. But we are willing to discuss compensation for the disputed grazing area near the old oak. Your father nods beside you, impressed. The men hesitate, professionally offended, but one finally says a compromise may be acceptable. You offer a serene smile. Inside, your heart drums like a warhorse. When they leave, your father pats your shoulder awkwardly, the closest thing he ever offers to affection. Well done, he says. Your mother beams. You handled them beautifully. And you did. You truly did. But as soon as the door closes, you sink into a chair, suddenly aware of how your back aches, how your fingers tremble, how heavy your head feels. Because it isn't just the decision, it's the weight. You're responsible for lives, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Tenants rely on your choices. Workers rely on your calm. Your household watches your every move, and yet, despite all this responsibility, your power remains fragile, conditional, easily dismissed with a man's raised voice. A quirky historical tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some medieval noblewomen signed documents with elaborate seals to prove authority in their husband's absence. Yet even then, scribes often added small notes clarifying that the decision would later require a man's approval. You stand slowly, feeling the ache in your spine grow deeper. Being a noblewoman means wielding power you're not allowed to own, shouldering duties you're not permitted to name, carrying burdens you're not supposed to acknowledge, and somehow, through all of that, doing it gracefully. You step out onto the balcony to breathe the cold air, watching the winter landscape stretch toward the horizon. Snow gathers across the fields you just defended. Your fields, your tenants, your responsibility, but never, truly, your control. You don't even get a single quiet evening to recover from the boundary dispute before the castle erupts into another crisis, one far louder, far more dangerous, and far more universal to the life of any medieval noblewoman. War, or at least the threat of it. A breathless messenger arrives at dawn, his cloak frozen at the edges and his horse steaming in the courtyard. You're barely awake when he bursts into the great hall, mud-splattered, shaking, wild-eyed. Your father ushers him forward, and your mother stands beside you so quickly you almost trip trying to follow. The southern barony marches, the messenger gasps. Armed men, a small force, testing borders. Your blood goes cold. Not just from the drafty stone. This cold is deeper, more primal. Because you've lived your entire life knowing this moment could come at any time. War doesn't just happen on battlefields. War arrives through rumours, shortages, rationing, fear, and the constant awareness that noble women are dangerously useful in conflict. You step closer to your mother. She squeezes your arm once, comfort, warning, unity, all tangled into one gesture. A mainstream historical fact echoes sharply in your thoughts. Noblewomen were often left to manage estates during war, issuing orders, rationing food, safeguarding valuables, negotiating, with hostile forces even defending fortifications. But at the same time, they were targets, weapons, leverage, hostages, symbols of victory or humiliation. Men fought battles, women lived them. Your father orders the hall cleared except for key advisors. You and your mother remain, because you must. Because women of your rank are expected to understand war even if you never step onto a battlefield. You listen as the steward lists what needs to be done, increase watch rotations, secure grain stores, confirm loyalty with tenants, prepare the smithy for urgent work, check the keep's defences. You feel each responsibility like a stone in your chest. Then your mother speaks quietly, but firmly. We may need to send the women and children to safety. Safety. The word stings because you know what it really means. Evacuation. Fleeing. Becoming burdens on other estates. And if things worsen, becoming political bargaining chips. Your father nods grimly. You leave the hall trembling, just slightly, but enough that your maid notices. She slips a shawl around your shoulders as you walk to the solar. The rumours will spread quickly, she whispers. People will panic. She's right. Within hours, the courtyard swells with anxious murmurs. Servants move faster. Guards pace the walls. Every clang of metal sounds sharper. Every footstep louder. War transforms the castle into a breathing thing, tense, restless, sleepless. You try to help where you can. You check on the storerooms, counting sacks of grain with the steward. You walk to the kitchen, finding the cooks already preparing meals that conserve ingredients. You pass through the nursery where nannies whisper to frighten children about thunder and distant storms. And everywhere, people look at you with expectations. You're a noblewoman. You must be calm, graceful, unshaken. But inside, fear spirals like winter wind. Historians still argue whether noblewomen feared war more than men. But they usually forget one crucial detail. If the walls fall, it's noblewomen who often face the worst. Being captured wasn't just humiliating, it meant being used as leverage, forced into marriages, held for ransom, or transferred like valuable cargo to secure peace. You walk to the battlements as the sun struggles through thick clouds. The wind slaps your cheeks and the fields below stretch barren and defenceless. The distant tree line looks sharper today, darker, as though hiding more than trees. A cluster of guards stands nearby, muttering about the southern forces. One notices you and straightens instantly, but the others continue whispering until he elbows them sharply. You act like you didn't hear, but you did. If they breach, the ladies go first. Hostages! Happened last winter in Dunford. Your stomach knots. You clutch the cold stone of the parapet, grounding yourself. You remember stories told in hushed tones around hearth fires. Noblewomen, smuggled out through hidden tunnels disguised in cloaks, riding through forests while enemy soldiers searched the roads. Some made it to safety, some didn't. A quirky historical tidbit drifts in. Certain castles kept secret ladies' passages, built explicitly for evacuating noblewomen when danger approached. You once asked your governess about yours. She smiled tightly and said, "We hope never to need it." Hope feels fragile now. As evening approaches, your father calls a meeting with the household. You stand beside him, spine straight, emotions buried. He announces that defences are strengthening, scouts are watching the roads, and evacuations will be prepared. Only if needed. The servants murmur, shifting nervously. Children cling to nannies. Older women nod knowingly as though they've lived through this before. Your mother steps forward next. "We will remain calm," she says. "Panic serves no one." Her voice is strong, steady. But when she steps back beside you, you feel her hand tremble just slightly. Later, in your chamber, she helps you pack a small chest. Not an official evacuation order, just preparation. Your hands shake as you fold your warmest cloak. "What if they come here?" you whisper. She looks at you, not as a noblewoman, not as a symbol, but as your mother. She cups your cheek gently. "Then we will survive it with dignity." You try to take comfort in her certainty, but you also know survival is never guaranteed. Not for noblewomen, not in war. You lie awake long after the candles are snuffed out. The castle creaks around you. Distant footsteps echo. Somewhere below, a dog barks sharply, once, twice, before falling silent. You imagine the southern soldiers marching, their boots sinking into mud, their banners snapping in the wind, their captains discussing strategy. You imagine yourself in their path, and with a shiver that no blanket can warm, you realize war may be waged by men, but its shadow falls heaviest on women like you. You barely sleep. Every sound in the castle feels amplified in the darkness. The clang of a distant door, footsteps echoing in corridors, the muted creak of beams shifting in the cold. When dawn finally arrives, you feel wrung out, like a cloth twisted too many times. Still, you rise. Noblewomen do not get to be tired, not even when the world feels like it's cracking at the edges. You expect another tense day filled with war preparations, but instead, your mother greets you with news so unexpected you nearly drop the cup of weak ale you're drinking. "A messenger came from Lord Edric at first light," she says, adjusting the clasp of her cloak. "The southern barony has withdrawn. The thread is gone." Just like that, your entire world tilts. The breath you've been holding for days finally loosens in your chest. Relief floods the castle. Servants smile again. The guards relax their shoulders. Children run noisily through the corridors. Even the dogs seem lighter on their paws. The great tension that held the fortress in its grip dissolves like morning frost. But peace brings something else, something no one prepared you for. A new role, a new stage of life. Because with the threat gone, the men begin discussing politics again. Alliances, marriages, future plans, and your name comes up. Again. Only this time, the conversation has changed. Your father asks to see you privately in the solar. You sit opposite him, hands folded, heart thudding. He clears his throat, solemn, thoughtful. "You handled yourself admirably this week," he says. "Your judgment, your composure, your counsel." You blink, startled. Praise from your father is rare. Warm praise, rarer than a dragon sighting, he continues. Should the worst have happened, you would have been responsible for the estate. You proved you could manage it. Your mother nods beside him, her expression softer than you've seen in months. "You're ready for more responsibility," she says. Your breath catches. responsibility. Not freedom, not choice, just more weight. What kind, you ask? Your father unfolds a parchment on the table, one carrying the seal of a wealthy neighbouring lord, a widower, older, respected, powerful. He has inquired about a possible match, your father says gently, and we believe it would secure your future, and ours, widowhood, a man with an estate, children possibly, expectations, duties, but also something else, something whispered about in noble households but never said aloud, autonomy. A mainstream historical fact rises in your memory. Widowhood was the one stage of life in which noble women often gained the most freedom. Widows could control property, make legal decisions, oversee estates, negotiate contracts, and even refuse remarriage. A married woman lived under her husband's authority. A widow lived under her own. But marriage to a widower? That was a complicated middle ground. You ask the quiet question trembling inside. You? What would be expected of me? Your father exchanges a look with your mother. It's clear they've rehearsed this. You would manage the children's upbringing, he says, oversee his lands while he travels, strengthen ties between our houses. You would be valued. Valued. You know what that really means. Useful. You retreat mentally, picturing the life they're describing. Days filled with household decisions, estate management, child rearing, alliances, appearances. No more girls giggling at festivals, no more idle afternoons, no more half-formed dreams about freedom. This would be your adulthood, your real adulthood. Yet within that reality, a strange truth sparkles in the dim edges of your thoughts. If you become a widow someday, if your life would open in ways it never has before. Historians still argue whether noble women secretly preferred widowhood. Some certainly did. Some feared it. Some wielded it like a second life. You imagine yourself older, wiser, sitting in a chamber you command, signing documents with your own seal, making decisions without anyone's approval. It feels impossible and intoxicating. But right now, you're not a widow. You're a young woman being guided toward a man twice your age, with expectations you never asked for. You ask your parents for time to think. They agree, graciously, though you know time is limited. Politics waits for no one. You wander outside into the sharp afternoon air. The festival decorations have been taken down. The courtyard is quieter, but your mind is loud. You walk to the edge of the orchard. Bare trees, skeletal branches creaking in the wind. You sit on a low stone wall, cloak wrapped tightly around you. A quirky historical tidbit flickers. Some noble widows kept entire gardens devoted to herbs symbolizing independence. Sage for wisdom, rosemary for remembrance, rue for sorrow, lavender for clarity. You imagine planting such a garden someday, tending it, owning it. But you're not a widow, not yet. You hear footsteps approaching softly. Lady Edgifu appears, calm and composed, her cloak fluttering behind her. She sits beside you without a word. You've heard, she says. You nod. She studies your face. It is not an easy thing, stepping into the life of a wife, or a stepmother. You stare at your hands. Do you think it is a good match? She takes a long moment before answering. Good, she repeats. Good is not a word I use for marriages. But I will say this. You would be respected in his household. He is not cruel, and he values competence. You release a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Then she adds, very softly, and if fate someday makes you a widow, you would command an estate of your own. You look at her sharply. She doesn't flinch. I was a widow once, she says, for a short while, long enough to understand what freedom tastes like. A shiver runs through you, not fear, but recognition. Widowhood? A life where your decisions matter, where no one checks your expression for alliance potential, where your lands are yours, where your title stands alone. But that future is only reachable through a path you do not choose. She rises, brushing frost from her cloak. Think carefully, she says, but remember, even a constrained life can open in unexpected ways. She leaves you alone with your swirling thoughts. You sit until your fingers go numb, staring at the winter sky. Marriage may imprison you. Marriage may elevate you. Marriage may someday free you. You don't know which path awaits, but you know this. Whatever future comes, you'll face it the way noble women always have, with endurance, with quiet strength, and with the hope of a night when the weight finally shifts in your favour. The next morning dawns with a pale, icy stillness, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones and makes every breath feel like it belongs to a different world. You rise slowly, wrapping a cloak around your shoulders before your maid even enters. You feel older than you did yesterday, not in the way years age you, but in the way choices do. Your parents summon you to the solar. You expect pressure, a decision, a deadline wrapped in polite formality. But when you step inside, you're met with something far gentler. Your father sits by the window, sunlight catching the silver in his beard. Your mother stands beside the fire, hands clasped, eyes warmer than you've seen in months. They exchange a glance, an entire conversation contained in one look, and then your mother speaks. "You may choose," she says softly. For a moment you stop breathing. Choose. Such a small word. Such a massive gift. They explain that the threat of war, the shifting power balances, the recent diplomacy, they've all changed the landscape. The widower's proposal is still on the table, but it is no longer a command. It is an option. One path among several. Your father gestures toward a chair. "Sit," he says, "and we will tell you what each future would look like." You sit, heart pounding. A mainstream historical fact clicks into place as they speak. Noblewomen rarely received choices, but when they did, even small ones, they shaped entire generations. A marriage could forge alliances or fracture them. A refusal could buy temporary independence. A delay could shift the political tides. Your father explains the advantages of the match: security, land, respect. Your mother outlines the risks: distance, stepchildren, expectations, and then softly she adds, "You could also remain with us a little longer, learn more, take your time. Take your time." Another luxury almost unimaginable. When they finish, they fall silent. The weight shifts to you. You don't answer immediately. Instead you ask, "What do you want?" Your father exhales. "Your safety." Your mother steps closer, smoothing a wrinkle in your sleeve. "Your happiness," she says quietly, as though the word might shatter if spoken too loudly. You nod, throat tight. Their honesty anchors you more than any map or plan. You spend the rest of the day walking the estate, one last lingering glide through the spaces that shaped you. You visit the nursery where children nap in clusters like small warm animals. The nanny smiles as you tuck a blanket around one sleeping toddler. This could be your life, tender, structured, constant. You walk through the great hall where tapestries rustle in faint drafts. Your fingers trail the embroidered threads, dragons, saints, woven fables. This could be your life, ceremony, expectations, performance. You slip into the herb garden, touching cold rosemary and brittle thyme. A maid hanging laundry nearby offers you a shy smile. This could be your life. Quiet routines, small freedoms, simple joys. You move along the battlements, gazing over the fields, those same northern fields you defended days ago. Snow glitters on the furrows. Smoke curls from tenant cottages. This could be your life, responsibility, leadership, decisions that ripple outward. Historians still argue whether medieval noblemen truly found meaning in these roles or merely survived them. But as you walk, you realize something important. Meaning isn't given, meaning is made, and misery, though abundant, isn't the whole story. By sunset, you return to your chamber. Your maid lights a candle, humming a quiet tune. You sit at your small writing desk where a single sheet of parchment waits. You breathe, you think, you choose. Your hand moves slowly, forming your signature with deliberate strokes. The decision is made, not because you were pushed, but because you finally felt steady enough to take the step. When you deliver the parchment to your mother, she reads it silently. Then she presses your hands in hers, eyes glimmering, not with pride or relief, but with a soft, aching tenderness. Whether you chose marriage or delay, or another path entirely, she understands. You chose your life with intention. Later you return to your chamber. The castle is quiet. Everyone has settled into the comforting rhythms of evening. You sit near the small window, watching the moon spread pale light across the courtyard. A stillness settles around you, not the cold, hollow quiet of isolation, but a deep, warm stillness that feels earned. You think of everything you've endured, the drafts, the dresses, the court politics, the expectations, The war shadows, the rumours, the loneliness, the duties you never asked for, the futures you were forced to imagine too soon. And somehow, despite all of it, you're still here, breathing, hoping, deciding. A quirky historical tidbit drifts into your mind. Some noblewomen stitched secret messages into their sleeves or hems, phrases like, "I endure, I wait, I choose." Tiny rebellions, quiet truths, hidden strengths. If you had a needle right now, you know exactly what you would stitch. "I am more than what they made me." As you prepare to sleep, a rare feeling washes over you. Not joy, not freedom, but peace. A soft, fragile peace that settles gently, like snow on still water. And as your eyes grow heavy, you realize that even in a life built from misery and duty, there are moments, small, human, precious moments, where you get to breathe your own breath, think your own thoughts, and shape your own future. It may not be much, but tonight, it is enough. The castle grows quieter now, its long stone corridors settling into the gentle hush that only arrives at the very end of the day. The fire in your room dims to a warm amber glow, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls, softening every sharp edge until everything around you looks a little kinder, a little gentler than before. You ease into your bed, feeling the weight of the blankets settle over you like a protective cocoon. Outside, the winter wind drifts against the shutters with a whisper, not a howl, just a soft reminder of a world turning quietly beyond these walls. Your breath slows, your shoulders loosen. Each inhale feels a little deeper, each exhale a little longer, as though your body is finally releasing 1,000 small tensions it has carried all day. Your mind drifts back over your journey. The crowded halls, the whispered politics, the heavy gowns, the long nights, the expectations you never asked for. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still standing, still finding moments of softness in a life that rarely offers them. Let your thoughts soften, like snowflakes melting on warm skin. Let the stories fade into a gentle blur, their sharp edges smoothing into comfort. Whatever choices lie ahead, whatever distant paths you may walk, tonight there is nothing to decide, nothing to weigh, nothing to endure, only warmth, only quiet, only the soft rhythm of your breathing in the dim glow of a fading fire. Allow yourself to drift, slowly, peacefully, into the kind of rest that feels like a warm hand on your shoulder. Steady, reassuring, safe. You're here now. You've made it through, and you can let go.